Hello, we're going to talk about Trig today and how do you use a calculator. Now know that every calculator is different. So I'm going to talk about in general terms and not specific terms. And for the EQ, I want you to write your specific steps because it'll be different to each person's calculator. And I want you to be consistent and use the same calculator every time. If you change calculators, it may confuse you because it may be different steps. So let us review first what the three trig ratios are: sine, cosine, and tangent, and they are also functions. Sine is, so if we're talking about an angle specifically, we'll label the sides. This is opposite, this is the adjacent, and this is the hypotenuse. So sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. And there are ratios. You can write the ratios and convert them to a decimal. So when we're going to use a calculator, we're going to have decimals. All right, now the first thing you have to do is make sure you're in the correct mode. And the mode you want is degrees, because that's how we measure our angles. Now there are different measurements, and in different math classes you may use radians, but for our class we use degrees. So if you look in your calculator, and it really depends on your calculator, you should have DEG, degrees. Some calculators just put D. If it is an RAD or GRAD, this could be also R, and this could be G. R or rad stands for radians. This is short for gradients. And that's not what we want. It'll give you different answers, and we don't want that. So that's the first thing. You have to make sure that you are in degrees. Right, the order of buttons that you're going to press depends on your calculator. Now, we are going to be using these three buttons, and you can use a scientific calculator or graphing calculator. The simple calculators, just with like 1 through 9, add, subtract, multiply, and divide, they won't have sine, cosine, tangent on it. Now, if when you hit these buttons, sine, cosine, tangent, the actual word pops up, it says sine, that means you are going to hit this button first, then you type the numbers, all right? But this is an older calculator. I actually have one of these in my classroom. If you hit, and here they are right here, if you hit sine and no words pop up, nothing, what you need to do, you're going to type the numbers first. So you have the numbers, and then second you type in sine, cosine, or tangent. Okay, and then you type in the trig function. So it really just depends, and you have to figure it out, okay, on your calculator. Now you can also, because every calculator, and I couldn't figure out my webcam to show you, I have like 6 or 7 calculators in front. I was going to try to show you actually the different buttons, but I couldn't figure it out. You could also Google it. Like if you're not sure and it's not working, Google your specific calculator and see, how do I find the sine or the cosine or tangent? All right. So let's actually find, right, the cosine, the sine, or tangent of a specific angle measurement. So remember how we wrote our ratios, we would write sine of angle, and then we would have a number here, right, a ratio. So here is your angle. So here's your angle. So what you're going to do, you're going to type in, so again, to review, For this one, for cosine, I would hit cosine first, and then I would type 5/4, and then equals. For this one, for this calculator here, I would type 5/4 first, then cosine. And I believe you don't, let's see, I have one of those calculators. Let's see, 54 cosine. And for that, I don't have to hit equals. Okay. So try that on your calculator. I'm going to do it on my calculator and make sure that we match. Because if we do not match, then you need to check maybe your mode maybe. Okay, so I have 0, and this is 4 decimal places because we want to be really accurate. 5, 8, 7, and I'm going to round that up to 8. So it was this. Okay. So I'm rounding this up 1. Okay, now I'm going to do tangent of 32. And I have 0.6249. Okay, round it up again. This was an 8/6, and it's going to go to 9. Right, the last one I'm going to is 9455. So again, make sure you have these answers. If they are not the same as mine, you need to double check your calculator. Notice on here, they do say degrees, right? Even over here. This one has a lot of extra things, but it also says degrees. So again, this is if you're given the angle, you need to find the decimal, which represents this ratio. Now going the opposite direction, we are actually going to find the angle itself. So there was a ratio, they converted to a decimal, and now we have to find the angle. And we're going to use the sign, and it's actually going to be the inverse sign. When you're looking for the angle, you're going to actually find the inverse. And the inverse on the calculator has that to the -1 power. Now it's a little confusing because it looks like a reciprocal as a negative exponent, but it is not. And the way to access this is if you look at sine, cosine, tangent, right above it, right here, does everyone see that? Do you see that sine to the -1, cosine to -1, tangent to -1? We don't say that, we say this is actually inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent. So that -1 is actually the inverse, right? That tells me I'm looking for the angle. So I'm going to say that again. When you find the angle, you're using the inverse. And to access the inverses, you can see it's a different color right above the buttons. So it's saying, hey, well, use a button that's that color. Over here, which button? That's our second button. So to find the angles for this particular calculator, you have to hit second first, then whatever trig function you want, and then the numbers. So the calculator will type that out. So you'll see the inverse. And then this is the angle, 73.142 degrees. Now on graphing calculators, you can see on this one, it doesn't show what mode it is. It doesn't show you degrees. So you actually have to go inside the menu into here where the mode is. And it'll show you if it's in degrees or not. So over here, if you're using this calculator where you type in the numbers first. Okay, let me double check my. Okay. So if you're using this kind of calculator, you type in the numbers first, then the second button's here, and then one of the trig functions, okay? For this one again, numbers first, second button, and then one of the trig functions. This is for a phone. I believe this is for an iPhone in particularly. When you turn it sideways, you have this sine, cosine, tangent. Now to access this, okay, so if you need the second one, you're going to have to, when you have to do the inverse, you're going to hit that. I forgot to take a screen of the next shot. So when you hit the second button, this menu will change and it'll show you the inverses here. So again, you have to play with your calculator, get used to it, really press all the buttons so you understand the order in which you use your buttons in your calculator. Okay, so let's go find the inverse. So this is going to do inverse sine 0.8915. All right, and it says to the nearest 10th degree. So I have 63.1 degrees. So it was 63.062. So I'm rounding to here. So that 6 is going to make that one go, that 0 to 1. All right. Again, I'm going to do inverse tangent because I'm looking for the angle. 0.3706. This is 20.3 degrees. Don't forget this degree symbol. Okay, and this is, all right, this turns out to be 49.99. Okay, so this is going to round to 0, so that's all going to round up. This is going to be 50.0. Now, the reason why I put that 0.0 there is to say I rounded it. So whoever's looking at it, they can say, oh, that might have been 49.9 or 49.98. So they know, or maybe it was 50.01, but they know it was rounded. Okay. So again, if you didn't get these answers, please play around with your buttons and your functions on your calculator or Google it to help you. So what do we use before calculators? Now, graphing calculators just started to come out when I was in high school in the 80s. And they were, graphing calculators were a big thing. Not very many people had it. Though the little scientific calculators were something that we used often. But even though we use those, and the scientific has the sine, cosine, tangent, still not a lot of people had those either. They weren't as common as what we would use, and we definitely didn't have cell phones. So what did people use beforehand? Trigonometry has been around for a very long time. What did they use before calculators? Oh, well, they used tables. And growing up, we had tables in the back of our geometry books, and we actually used them. Like I said, not everyone had a calculator that had sine, cosine, and tangent on it. So we'd have to use these tables. And you can see that all the tables, they rounded to 4 decimal places. And that's why it's very common. Give you very accurate answers. And this is only a partial table. We go all the way down and then come all the way back up. And someone actually had it calculated by hand and then created these tables. So I wanted you to know where these numbers come from and what we used to use. And just so when you look at the table, you can understand the progression of sine, cosine, and tangent with the different angle measurements. So part of your homework today is to use a table just to look at and see it. So there is a table on our Canvas in the assignment. So you can look at that to answer some of your homework questions. All right. You guys have it so easy on a calculator. So, we would have to type in lots of things. It was more work. It makes me appreciate the calculator though. All right, don't forget to answer the EQ. Thanks for watching. Bye.